Hello Internet. Marvel released a new movie, so now it's time to talk about it. Thunderbolts is the latest superhero action film from Disney. This time, the story follows a group of assassins sent to kill one another. At the last second, they realize they're being set up and work together to escape. In the process, they unleash something far worse than any of them have ever dealt with. The story was written by Eric Pearson and Joanna Cullo, and the film was directed by Jack Schreier. It stars Florence Pugh, Lewis Pullman, and David Harbour alongside an ensemble cast of returning Marvel characters. Okay, so this film is a decent return to form for Marvel, and a solid entry into the genre of superheroes. Having said that, I have my problems with it, and I'll outline those at the end. On the positive side of things, the story is well written and exciting. Most of the cast does a fantastic job of their roles. The visual journey is carefully shot with a lot of cool action sequences. Even the soundtrack is up to par for Marvel standards. Starting with the story, it begins with a classic spy cliché and then slowly expands back into the superhero genre. It sets up the ground rules early and then follows them all the way to the end without straying. The journey is an exciting affair with lots of action, a little bit of humor, and just enough heart to get you through the film. Most of the story focuses on Yelena as the main character, with Bob as a close secondary, and the Thunderbolts following up in distant third. The third act does diverge a little bit from the rest of the story, taking more of a Captain Planet approach to things, but it still works within the confines of the film. Cast-wise, you have strong performances from Florence Pugh and David Harbour, with the rest of the Thunderbolts doing a good job but not being given enough time to really develop their characters. Florence Pugh's Yelena is an assassin who wants to quit. She's starting to feel horrible about her past and desperately wants to move on to something better. She agrees to do one last mission in the hopes that her future will improve. Pugh shows off some great emotional work, poses well for the action sequences, and really nails her team chemistry. She plays well off the other Thunderbolts, especially Bob. The relationship between the two of them has some decent potential for the future. David Harbour plays a father figure and a bit of comedic relief. As the Red Guardian, he's a has-been who's desperate to hold on to his glory days. When Yelena comes to him, regretful of her past, he doesn't quite know how to help her, but his heart is in the right place. Harbour has a few great relationship moments with Pugh and does a fantastic job as the comedic relief. The rest of the Thunderbolts, Bucky, and even the villain Valentina get relegated to supporting character roles and don't get to develop much beyond stereotypes. The actors do a solid job of their roles, adding a little bit of flavor, some humor, and a few decent action poses into the mix. They support the story well, but kind of get forgotten about in the third act. Just a little bit. Visually, the film has lots of great costumes, amazing locations, and visual effects that will blow your mind. They did a fantastic job of creating slick, action-packed sequences that look good and are easy to follow. Things get a bit wonky in the third act when the villain pops off, but overall they did a good job of telling the story in a stylish manner. For big standout moments, they had a ton of team fight scenes that looked amazing. They let each of the Thunderbolts play to their strengths in the fights and swapped around between them as they took down their foes. They did a good job of giving everyone an equal amount of screen time during the fights and kept things interesting by ramping up the scenario constantly. They had non-stop cool stunts and visual effects to complement the fights, and all of it looks clean as a whistle while they do it. Sound-wise, the film is pretty formulaic for a Marvel film. It's got complex scored instrumentals in an epic style that follows the storyline precisely, amplifying every emotional beat. The tracks do a good job of adding tension and little bits of happiness or sadness when called for, but don't have much of an impact outside of that. Which brings me to the film's two real negatives. The first one is that the soundtrack has no flavor, and the second is that Lewis Pullman's Bob Reynolds performance doesn't work. Starting with the music, it's flavorless and sounds like every other Marvel film. The music is too quiet, too generic, and doesn't have enough impact to truly stand out. Long gone are the days of funky beats and quirky pop songs that match the situation. Now all we get is an endless stream of slop pouring out from the bland factory. It makes the film feel generic and like it has no soul. Next we have Lewis Pullman as Bob Reynolds. His performance sucks. Pullman does a good job of the initial quirky human character, and he does okay with the emotional beats. The problem comes from his transition towards the end of the film. He went from being a real character to a cartoon villain in literally seconds with almost no given reason. The depiction of Reynolds in his other form was also pretty stupid and did Pullman's performance a massive disservice. They literally shroud his face so you can't see any of his expression work, and they distort his voice so you can't get any details there either. It looks silly, it plays out even worse, and it looks nothing like the comic book character that people have come to know and love. It was honestly quite disappointing how his story arc ended. Which brings me to my final thoughts. Personally, I enjoyed the film for the first 2/3 and then just had to roll my eyes at the Captain Planet ending. It technically works, but it feels so campy that I was a little annoyed. That said, they did a good job with the visual journey. Most of the cast are nailing their roles. The story is entertaining enough and stays within the lines, and even the soundtrack does its job. As far as films go, this one is actually fairly well put together. For a rating, I'd give this film a 7 out of 10. Okay, normally I'd just end my review, but this time I felt like giving a few spoiler-related thoughts. If you don't want to be spoiled, head out now, and go enjoy the film. If you stay, I don't want to hear about being spoiled. To start, this film feels more like Bob Reynolds' origin story than it feels like a Thunderbolts movie. Walker, Taskmaster, Ghost, Bucky, and even Valentina are just there to facilitate the Sentry introduction, and all of them are criminally underutilized in this film. They're there for the first little bit, they get a few nice moments during the early fights, and then they just slip into the background and start participating in a meaningful way. Valentina is the worst. She sets up the scenario, they build her up as this master manipulator, and then she just turns into a joke character when Sentry shows up. They could cut Walker, Taskmaster, Ghost, Bucky, and even Valentina, and the film probably wouldn't change much. There'd just be a mysterious force controlling Sentry instead of this lame duck. I also hated the third act and the ending. I hate Shadow Bob. And I even hate the depiction of Bob in general. Sentry is a Superman-type character, and he's supposed to fly around and punch people. There's a little bit of that in here, but then they transition over to Shadow Bob, and it's just awful. He points his hand at people, and they turn into shadows. It felt like the lamest cop-out for violence that I've seen in a superhero film in a long time. Especially given that they start the film by killing off Taskmaster by shooting her in the head. It also doesn't mesh at all with the comic book depiction of Sentry, which was what I and a lot of other people were hoping for. In the comics, Sentry literally tears people in half and slices through them with his laser eyes. To see him lamely holding his hand up like some kind of monk was just a big letdown. I knew they weren't going to do anything too graphic with the character, but what they chose was too soft. The ending ends up feeling like some kind of corny 80s cartoon with them literally hugging to make the bad guy go away. Then they tossed out the story even harder by having Valentina escape punishment by setting up a press conference. It was so stupid that all I can do is mourn Norman Osborn. There's no chance that character gets to come out and play now that we have Valentina shitty playing around the scene. Anyway, those are just my thoughts on the film. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Bye bye!